Hi, welcome to Infusion Health, the podcast. I'm comedian Chris Patrick, aka Self-Proclaimed Power Man, and I'm here with my co-host and significant other, Rach.
Hi, guys.
Now, today we got we're going to talk about with the pandemic going on, a lot of stuff going on, and Rach is kind of on the front lines with this, with the ER, working in the ER. We got an ER doctor on here. His name is Dr. Dana Cowles, and he's calling from Florida. Dr. Cowles, welcome to the show. Dr. Cowles.
Thanks for having me.
All right,
Yes.
There we are.
Yeah.
Okay, so Chris, I don't work in the ER.
Okay,
The
okay.
doctor does.
Okay.
I work in the observation unit.
Okay, you were okay. I should know this. So, Dr. Cowles, we from what we've been seeing on the news and from what Rach has been telling me, a lot of people have been coming into the ER, and and Rach, can you kind of set this up?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were going to talk first with you about being one of the ones that volunteered to be vaccinated in the case studies, right?
Yes.
So
one of the testing sites is down here locally near Orlando in Deltona, Florida. And I found out about it fairly early on because I was involved in some of the research protocols years ago for different things. And one of the things about dealing with COVID every day was a lot of fear that was involved. And a lot of people may not know that coronavirus is something that we've known about for forever.
okay.
Mhm.
And virus itself, you would look at it and say it's a cold.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just, and rhinovirus and several others. But so when we started hearing about a deadly, very contagious coronavirus, a lot of times we thought it was kind of a fake story. And then we started seeing evidence of it and found out that it was something markedly different than what we were used to originally.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So,
And so one of the problems that we had is the fear of what this was. So
Yeah.
we're very well trained and versed in contagious diseases. We've dealt with SARS and swine flu and Ebola. We know how to gear up and use hazmat or infectious protocols,
Yeah.
personal protective equipment. And we know how to do all this. And it was interesting to see the entire public get a taste of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
But because of the unknown, this was almost an overwhelming aspect of how do you treat it? What do you do? And can you personally become a victim of it? And we were dealing with this every day. And once that fear settles in for so long, the first thing you're going to think is, I want to just get this over with. If I'm going to catch it, if I'm going to, get it, even if I die from it, I don't want to sit there thinking about it day after day after day. Eventually, let's get this over with, you know? And the hardest part about it was actually going home to the family.
Yep.
When kids come home and you have a 5 and a 3-year-old who want to hug you and say they love you, and you have to push them away
Yes.
yeah.
and say, "Oh, until I take a shower, not until
Yep.
I delouse. I'll make sure that I'm not going to spread this to you."
Yep.
And so when I heard that there was a potential for a vaccination, I wanted to be involved as much as I could if there was anything that I could do to help out with this. So, we enrolled into the study and we were part of it for the Moderna vaccine. Yes, my wife and I.
Okay.
Okay, so the Moderna vaccines. So one of the things, and I want to put kind of address on this. I remember I was at the gym and I was talking to some guy, and me and this guy got into a conversation, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, don't get the vaccine because it's made with aborted fetus tissues and stuff like that." And I see all this, and right now with the internet, people can put anything on the internet, and next thing you know, thousands of people are believing it or something like that. I want to put this stuff to rest. What exactly is the vaccine? What's in the vaccine? And I know it's not made with aborted fetus tissues and all that. All the rumors that people are putting out there.
So I don't know that I could speak to that fully. I know that there was some testing along that line.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't every vaccination. So the vaccines itself utilizes mRNA, and it's a synthetic. You look at it like a DNA component,
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Where DNA is part of our basic genetic code.
Yeah.
mRNA is a different type of genetic code that is only specific for viruses.
Uh-huh.
So to be able to use this, it's something that the body can learn to recognize the viral genetic code without incorporating or changing your own genetic code.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes specific to fight against your code. It just is specific only to the virus.
Mm-hmm.
And use some of the chemical composition of the outer surface membrane so that it recognizes it right away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a technology that's been there for a long, long time. You know, but to be able to utilize it specifically for people is something that's brand new.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that people had is they said it wasn't studied enough. You know, and the reality of it is that you need to have an initial pilot study of 1,000 people to determine whether or not there's safety or whether or not it is actually effective.
Mm-hmm.
And then after the pilot study of 1,000 people, you need 30,000 for the main trial.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes years to do these studies because it takes a long time to get 30,000 volunteers to test an unproven vaccine against a virus that nobody cares about. Like, do you want to run out and join a study to test a Zika virus?
Mm-hmm.
You know, but what happened here is there was several companies that were involved, and they each had 60,000 volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
And so if people want to say, well, you know, how did it happen so quickly? It was because people were willing to get involved and help.
Yeah.
That's what changed everything. That made it that they could get vaccines out within 1 year.
Uh-huh. Yeah, well, there's been things too about as far as it's like you're saying about the studies and stuff like that, but there's also been things about people saying you know, about the boosters and stuff like that. I'm like, well, if you get bit by like a raccoon, you have to, you know, you got to get your rabies shots. You know, I don't know if they still do them in the stomach, but you got to get your rabies shots, and then you have to get a couple boosters after that. But everybody's like, well, how come we have to get the vaccine? Then we got to get the boosters, and we got to get well, the vaccines only last for so long, but you know, but it's like anything else. You're going to have to get boosters.
Correct. And there's not a lot of information that's here because people do have to give a little bit of leeway that this is a learning exercise.
Yeah.
You know, for people who sit there and say, well, you know, there's not going to be any long-term effects of COVID. You don't know that.
Yeah.
You know, there's going to be the ability for the body to develop initial immunizations, and you don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to keep going back into the lab once every 4 to 5 to 6 months to a yearly follow-up kind of thing after that, so that we can continuously get our titers drawn. They draw like 7 vials of blood and, you know, check along whether or not we still have antibodies to it. And that's going to determine, you know, whether or not the boosters are needed.
Mm-hmm.
And so see that they're either falling off or they're maintaining to an adequate level, that's going to determine whether or not people need boosters. So to sit there and say we need 1 booster, 2 boosters, 3 boosters, nobody knows yet.
So my
and
question,
so
sorry,
sorry. So there's some vaccines that are one and done, but those are very few.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if you need a tetanus booster, you know, you have to have that once every 10 years, 5 years if you get a contaminated cut.
Yeah.
There's several that are there that, you know, like the polio or varicella, you know, you actually get one and then you get 1 booster, and that seems to be good for a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no guarantee once you get a booster or a vaccination that that's going to be a guarantee that you're not going to be able to catch a particular disease.
Mm-hmm.
So people shingles shot, and once in a while they get zoster, you know, which is shingles. So some people get the pneumonia vaccine and they will get pneumonia.
Mm-hmm.
When they talk about the efficacy of a vaccination, one of the things that people need to understand is that you can say that a vaccine is 90% effective. And that doesn't mean that each individual person is going to be susceptible to get 10% of the disease. Well, if it's 90% effective, then I'm just going to get it and it's going to be mild. What they're actually saying is that you need to have a certain titer level of immunity in your bloodstream to say that you're protected against a particular virus or disease. So let's say the random number is you need 2 million particles per deciliter, whatever it could be, right? And once you're over that threshold, then you're going to be protected against it. So to say that a vaccine is 50% effective just means that 50% of the people have that level. And 50% of the people might be below that level. If it's 90% effective, that means 90% of the people are above that level. There are some people that will get vaccines. You could even give them 100 of them, and they'll never develop that immune threshold, to get there. And so if you say that the Moderna vaccine is 95% effective, that means 1 in 20, it's not. They're not up to that level. And if you take 1 in 20 of our population of 350 million, right, that's a pretty sizable number. That might mean 7 million plus people, aren't getting the adequate protection, even though this vaccination is very good. And then people make the fallacy argument where they jump ahead and they sit there and say, well, if that number is that big, then there's no point in getting it, right?
Yeah.
There is a huge point in getting it, right? Because that means that the other 343 million plus people are very well protected and need to be protected, and especially to protect our population. There is a lot of susceptible people within that much larger number that are going to be saved from it.
So one of the things with the vaccination, one of the things with the vaccination is what about some people were doing, and I know Trump was saying this about hydroxychloroquine or whatever.
Yes. So hydroxychloroquine is a medication that was originally designed to treat arthritis. They found, by serendipity, I guess you could say, that the cells were filled with a hydroxychloroquine chemical, which didn't allow certain diseases to get in. And the way that they found this was just because people were traveling to endemic areas with malaria and they weren't getting malaria. That was kind of mind-boggling to people, that they're like, what is the commonality between these people that didn't get malaria that everybody else did? And they found this hydroxychloroquine. Now, is that a given? No, you can still get it if you're taking hydroxychloroquine, but it's one of the medications that were given to people, to travel to endemic areas to try to protect them from contracting it. So they utilized that and said, is that effective against things like coronavirus? Can you prevent people from getting COVID? And what they found was that it actually is pretty effective in protection. But the way that it works is filling the cells so that the coronavirus can't get into the cell afterwards. And what happens then is it's not a drug that's out there in large supplies, and there's not a lot of manufacturers of it. And so people who have arthritis who still take it, and people who use it as malaria prevention and stuff like that, it's actually hard to come by.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, the word was getting out there that this could protect people from coronavirus, and so what they did was they tried to produce as much of it as they could, but people were starting to run out and prescribe it for everybody to try to prevent this thing. Well, again, you got, if you have a couple of thousand people that are taking it on a regular basis that have a tough time getting it, now all of a sudden you have a surge where you say, hey, this could actually protect you. And you got 350 million people who want it, and they want to take it every day. That's a tough bill to fill, right?
Yeah.
And so then it was, they said, we're going to reserve it for the people who are the sickest and give it to them. But the way that it works doesn't fit with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a thing. It's got to fill the cell so that the coronavirus can't get in there. Okay, well, if you're giving it to somebody who's already sick, well, the horse has left the gate.
Yeah.
And they did the studies on it, and they said, well, this actually isn't doing anything to help. Well, I mean, that's almost a given. Physiologically, you would sit there and say, yeah, that's not how it works, so it's not going to be effective if you treat somebody with it after they're already sick.
Mm-hmm.
So once the studies came out and said this isn't really effective, then it was just abandoned as a protocol altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Fact of the matter is, and I'm not saying that it is fully effective as a preventive measure either, because the studies on that actually just haven't been done.
Mm-hmm.
So my question for COVID is, for the people that are really sick out there, we're giving this extra shot, they're not actually in the hospital. Some are. What is this extra shot that everybody's talking about?
Well, the treatment for people who have active coronavirus, there's a couple of options. The majority of it is supportive care.
Yep.
And one of the biggest problems that happens is inflammation that creates a oxygen hunger that will bring people's oxygen level down. They feel very fatigued. People that I've talked to have said that it almost isn't that they have trouble breathing. It's just that they're too tired to do it.
Yeah.
It's just this overwhelming fatigue that people feel. Now, if you have somebody who has an oxygen level less than 92% or 90s or in the 80s, especially as they're ambulatory,
I've
like
seen
if
them
they
in
walk
the 70s.
so like that, and even go down to the 50s and the 40s. But if you have somebody that's walking around and they go less than that 90% mark,
Yep.
We generally try to admit them to the hospital.
Yes.
And you could try to get treatment within the first 10 days. And it seems like day 8, 9 is the pinnacle. Like people have some mild symptoms and then they kind of improve. And then right around day 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there, they get significantly worse. So it seems to be the trend of most of it.
Yeah.
What happens then is, people will be admitted to the hospital and given an antiviral. So there's an IV antiviral medication called remdesivir that will combat and fight down the virus and help people to get over it. They started out trying to use steroids because they saw that this was a large inflammatory reaction, and they found that it was not effective in people with very mild disease and actually could make people worse. So they abandoned using steroids, but they do use it if people are sicker. The other thing that you're referring to is the monoclonal antibodies.
Yes.
So the monoclonal antibodies is a synthetic treatment that acts as an adjunct to your own immune system and provides the antibodies that you're trying to build up by getting a vaccine, or if you've been infected with it, your body produces an antibody that will help to fight against the virus. And so if you get this artificial antibody, it just augments your own immune system to be able to do the same thing. And it works pretty effectively in the early stages for somebody who's not overwhelmingly sick. So if their oxygen levels are normal and they actually get the monoclonal antibody within the first 10 days, and the earlier that they get it, the better that it works. But again, you have supply problems. So, this is something that's been rationed nationwide, and it's variable on who provides it or, when it's provided. And that was something that was pretty prevalent in Florida for the first series of monoclonal antibodies, which there's been 4 or 5 so far that I know of.
I know in Minnesota you have to fall under a certain category.
Right. And that's because they're trying to save the supplies for the people who need it the most. So it's generally people who have certain comorbidities or over the age of 65 are at particular risk for significant harm or death from coronavirus. These are the people that are most inclined to get the monoclonal antibodies. Yep. Initially in Florida, it was almost a free-for-all. They had so much supply of it that they ordered in that anybody over the age of 12, who tested positive for coronavirus were eligible to get it.
Sure. At
different centers, they started administering it at one of the local sports stadiums, one of the local movie theaters, these kind of things where they'll do infusions. People would just line up and get it.
Mm-hmm. So you think we'll get rid of Corona, or will Corona be like, we got, flu Corona? Will it ever go down?
I think it will be flu Corona.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'd sit there and say that any answer that anybody gave would be pure speculation. This has become a new normal and a new paradigm.
Yep.
The amount changed is pretty phenomenal, but the changes that happen seem to be degrading. So each wave of it seems to be a little bit less than previously. One of the things that happens is, when you have mutations and things, it's like a change in people, right? So no two people are really the same. Some are stronger, some are weaker, some are faster, some are smarter, whatever. Well, the same thing happens in a viral population. The thing is that the ones that are strongest, like if they're a complete bully, kill themselves out quicker, right? Mm-hmm. So somebody might contract coronavirus and they weren't going out to parties. They weren't mingling with a million other people. They were getting so sick so fast that they were straight to the hospital, and a lot of those people died. Mm-hmm. And this was a phenomenon that we saw that was just, it was heartbreaking to say the least. But this was back before we had the monoclonal antibodies, before we even had the antiviral remdesivir. We had a lot of supportive care to give, and you would have people who looked okay, that 3 hours later were on a life support breathing machine, and within several hours of that, were gone. Mm-hmm. It became more concerning because of that, because we didn't know where this was coming from, how to treat it, what to do with it. And, when they started telling people to mask up and isolate from each other and locking down all of society, was because of this. And there was never a guarantee in those lockdowns that you weren't going to catch it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What it was actually, if let's say I work in an emergency department and I work a 12-hour shift and I'm used to seeing 20 people, when people get concerned, especially because of media and other things that they're getting their information from, the media was very particular, especially in the beginning, that they'd say, this is how many people have it and this is how many died. How many have it, this is how many died. So the first few people that I talked to with it, I would tell them, well, your test came up positive. Remember back in the day, we didn't even have tests. In the beginning, we just had to take their symptoms and say, yeah, I think you got it. But when you tell people that they have it, all of a sudden they would start crying and they say, well, I don't have my affairs in order. Like,
right. Oh my goodness. I was there at the beginning. Yeah. And you've been in ER for 17 years, right?
Right. So. And this was the thing in the beginning. I'd have to tell them, like, first of all, don't jump off the ledge, right? It's not an end game. Second, your affairs not being ordered, you need to work on that individually. That's something that, you should always be prepared to have the bus hit you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right? The third thing is, I'm about to tell you to go home and drink some soup.
Yeah.
Take your Tylenol and drink plenty of fluids. You're going to do great, because most people do great.
Yeah.
But
the other question I got was, they're going to blame me. Work is going to be so mad at me. And it was like, okay, but this is not something you could prevent. You got to go home and take care of yourself.
Right. Make sure you're not spreading it as much as possible.
Yeah.
And so if we saw, like, let's say 25 people in a normal 12-hour shift, because people became concerned about it, they all wanted to get checked. And especially when the testing came out, they wanted to get tested. Mm-hmm. And most other people were providing appointments for testing, or they would take a certain number, or they said, we had a certain allotment of tests. So a lot of people will just naturally go to the emergency room and say, I just want to test.
Yeah.
And what do you tell them at that point? Like, we're not a testing center. That's not appropriate just to have a test.
Yeah.
So they would tell them, we're only testing people with symptoms. Well, I mean, that's easy to get around. Yeah, I've got symptoms. I've got all the symptoms.
I've got a cough. Right? I got a fever.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I got it. I want to test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So in a normal place that if I see 25 and maybe 3 of my partners also see 25 and that's our entire census, well, now all of a sudden you get 40 people showing up within an hour.
Yeah.
Now, maybe 1 or 2 of them are sick. The rest just want to get screened. But how do you find the 1 or 2?
Mm-hmm.
And if it takes several hours to get through those people, well, then now it's 5 because, 3 others got very sick. Mm-hmm. But you need to kind of, work that out. And I've seen this phenomenon too around I went to New York City recently and they had these testing centers. And it was just fascinating because there was 20 of them are so set up. Mm-hmm. And people were standing in line, long lines, like a block and a half long to get tested in these places. Mm-hmm. And it just struck me. I was like, why are they getting tested? Is it because they're sick? Is it because they need a work note or they're doing it to travel? Or, is there some reasoning behind it? But the one thing is that, the thought that came to me was, if I got into that line and didn't have COVID,
now I have it.
I would imagine by the time I finished that line, I would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because the mask can only do so much.
Correct. And it's there as a certain percentage, even in N95, when somebody say, what's an N95? Well, an N95 just means the whole size in there that allows you enough oxygen to breathe is small enough that it can keep out 95%.
Yeah.
Okay, that 5% is getting in. And again, that means 1 in 20, right?
Yeah.
So if you have an N100, that kind of thing, but the smaller the hole size goes, the trick is you need to be able to breathe.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that, especially as people are using their shirt to cover their mouth, or they're using various things of various quality. Are these 100% effective? I would say no, not even close. But one of the things that I would say is it was very protective against flu.
Yeah.
It's fascinating that we would test for flu that usually you get on a seasonal basis, and then you didn't see it for a year or almost 2. And we're starting to see flu cases now because people are out mingling without the masking and stuff like that. So, and as you ask, is this going to be a paradigm for us? And you also asked how many boosters would we need? Well, flu vaccines, because the flu changes so much, you need to get once a year.
Yeah.
The virus is kind of dying down in its strength as far as how much it's going to affect us. Mm-hmm. There's no way to tell how many boosters we're going to need or how often until the full data sets come back. Right. But I will tell you that this is likely to be part of our new paradigm, and hopefully it dies down to the point where it's just kind of as cold as the flu and stuff that we're very used to without having to adjust our lifestyle.
How close are we getting to that?
It's hard to say when it changes.
That is correct, but I would say that we're coming closer and closer all the time because right now it's Florida. Nobody wears masks around. Everybody's out in public. The number of cases that we're seeing are far less.
Yeah.
And the people are far, far less sick.
Yeah.
And the vaccines have been a game changer because, the number of people that are coming in with it. And right now the hospitals are kind of overwhelmed in as far as how busy they are. And I wouldn't say it's particularly because of COVID.
True.
It's actually people are so scared of getting COVID that they're waiting until the absolute last minute to go to the hospital. And then they're coming in super sick and dying, where you have to do a lot more things. So I'm seeing a lot more phenomenon of people that, let's say I have gripping chest pain and all of a sudden,
the cases that are not COVID and the people that are okay, I'm going in for my chest pain and not going to come back later when it's too late.
Right. And so I saw somebody the other day that had this gripping chest pain. He had some EKG changes, and we measure an enzyme called troponin that measures whether or not you're having heart damage. So if some of the muscle cells in your heart die, they spill out this troponin enzyme. And you try to protect as much of the heart as possible by getting to them as quickly as possible. So that's why we say if you have significant chest pain, get it checked out right away.
Yeah.
And
I mean, during the pandemic, that's what I was seeing a lot. A lot of people that were, okay, I'm not going to wait in the ER for 36 hours to get checked out. I'll just come back later. And then they were coming back too late.
Right, exactly. And so if a normal troponin is less than 0.04, this gentleman had a troponin of 29.6. And I said, how long have you been having the chest pain? He goes, like this? And I said, yeah, like this. How long? He goes, 8 days. I said, well, why didn't you come in earlier? And he said, well, I didn't want to catch COVID.
Yeah.
People with COVID. And I said, well, I mean, funerals are cheap too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So definitely, if you have pain, get checked out. Well, doctor.
Well, the last thing I want people to understand is, don't just get the shot for yourself. Get the shot for those people that you love that are compromised. Because,
absolutely,
yeah, I mean that it's not just a selfish thing to get the shot. It's you're taking care of your loved ones that are compromised.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well said.
Well said. Well, Dr. Cowles, this has been a great conversation, interesting conversation. I'll let Rach close us out.
All right. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
On here, we are building Lines of Love and making you guys your best advocate. If you appreciated what you heard, please listen for the next one. And until next time, we're out.
Take it easy.